Now, in order to get the most out of the substance and worth and reality that lives in something like the Upanishads or the Vedas or any of these quote-unquote golden ages of human poetical depth and connection, of soulful relation, which really I would like to maintain truly exceeds all accidental names and dimensions we can give to it. It's important to put it into its human condition, its situation of arising, and in order to see that, it's very, very useful to see the different shared dimensions that are not at all unique to India and appreciate how those situations unfolded. So I think the easiest and the best comparison we can take to understand truly what exists in the Upanishads or the Vedas is ancient Greece, because they certainly had cultural communication. Ancient Greece, like India or China, had its period of sages who understood that this wisdom guiding their life, this direct experience of realization to which they were allied to come to the soul of all things, was pivotal and essential and had to have direct living connection. So the way they roused and awoke that connection infused their whole culture, from what we choose to call their music of Orpheus to these sages with their independent traditions that, were they in India, we would probably consider as hermitages or ashrams or rishis in retreat. So that when we see something like the image of mystical recluse and meditation predominating over the cultural fabric that follows, it's important to see that the same moral, integral, spiritual, intellectual, and organic living regard existed in Greece, no less than in India, and I presume in all natural and undiluted conditions of humanity's state. And that explains part of the great interest that has always been held for these periods. Because I don't mean to suggest, and I think it would be disastrous for the essence of our own life and engagement to believe that there is some removed golden age that reinforces the loss of connection to our life and direct realization in ourselves. Rather, like seeds falling in different places, when, say, assumed patterns of disease, of not useful behavior that are inhibitive to life or that strand it out away from itself, have not come in the same way to predominate, then the organic and comprehensive tendencies don't have to consciously defend themselves to the same degree, and the richness that has a universal connection hasn't been given to the same varieties of developed and hardened symptoms that we give the names of alienation or inversion, where people think to possess that which is essential to the germ, the living seed of every life. But I don't want to treat this merely as a theoretical condition either, because what I think has stood in the way of so much understanding and so many people assuming that they can speak for the merit of these living occurrences is that they do not regard it as an organic or a natural phenomena. Because if a life is integral and unfolds, every seed, let us say, contains the same confrontation of living richness, which it unfolds, experiences, and reconciles to the depth of its fulfilled fruition and forming. And so the reason why certain ages and epochs that have more poetic or comprehensive or undiluted connection and grace to what they unremittingly conceive as the essence of their own nature and the revelation of their own purpose, comes to a more direct and comprehensive and living engagement, then that thereby strengthens as the essence of all communication and realization, strengthens to the soul and harbor of ourselves. So it's not for no reason that, for instance, the minds that formed the Renaissance, turn back to this, the minds that brought the Renaissance to its incompleted close, because I don't want to imply any mechanical necessity in these things, like Giordano Bruno or Newton, had front and center the divine wisdom that they'd see in either Greece or the Hermetic tradition, that were all instances of the exact same living force that we'll find either in India or in Greece, Egypt, or China, or any place that we can turn our mind to. And it's only enriched by seeing the same situation in all the different interactions and margins, so that you can round the experience, feel it from all sides, and understand it in its natural cause and condition. But while one is doing this, there is no judgment of if we see things that we may think are diseases or disturbances that aren't acting to the condition of health. That's not blaming the people who have that disease or who have been ensnared in that any more than people's being short-circuited by what we would consider dissipated or wrongful behavior is something other than a false attachment to appearances and entanglements that lose the integrity of their selves. And that's very important, because when we come to the Upanishads, or when we come to Socrates, and everything that with these and of these follow, the situations created a state where there was a loss of poetic connection, where the techniques of the sophists, the techniques of the Pharisees, the techniques of the law courts, of pulling at words, creating abstractions, and assuming a competence that thought it could instruct as a mechanical interaction to some degree the lives of men without knowing the pious heart at the essence of things, slowly, if not in the thought, then in the manner, came to predominate and shape a loss of organic richness, a loss of meaningful connection, a loss of a living integrity that informs all that we think of as alienation or estrangement. So first, I wanted to make some comment along this line of consideration, because we have to put the organic whole of all these expressions and realize them for what inspired them. Because if you cannot understand what creates a thing, if you cannot understand what gives the motivation, situation, intuition, and connection that makes it an organic whole, and you only treat it in appearances and parts, you may serve some narrow purpose that you think may be of importance, which I think probably doesn't serve the interests of life or realization and engagement, but you're not treating the thing in itself. You're telling stories, you're creating abstractions, but you're not seeing to the living and dignified, I'd say almost pious and integral dimensions of what lives in the presence of every single one of these concerns that we can draw before us. And so, before treating the Vedas, or in tandem with treating the Vedas, we can turn our minds to these situations in Greece. For as I said in our discussion, ancient Greece, in my opinion, in this period, had a shared culture in which the reflexive inspiration and realization of many minds inhabited a very similar and shared mantle and conception and form of union that transcended the accidental parts of their expression and witness. And this, even apart from, as we shall see, their disagreements with each other on certain matters. For instance, Heraclitus, who we shall perhaps read a little bit of first in the fragments that come down to us, is noted to have thought that Homer based these things and was worthy to be brought out and whipped, which he said, I'm sure, in humorous declaim. And also someone who perhaps held very much in common with him, like Pythagoras, he said, by holding it in secret and holding a part which should be common to all, profaned by his abstruse treatment what is necessary to the lives and essence of humanity's condition. But despite things like this, the general tone and candor of what one finds in Heraclitus, Diotima, Parmenides, in this whole age, has many central things, I would say, that are essential and that are indeed deeply akin and familiar to what one will find in the Vedas, which occurred a great period before this. And that in the Vedas you have a prolonged tradition, much better preserved, much better developed, that spoke the same language, had accessed the same way, had opened the shared intuitions in order to allow unforced and fully assumptive, inspired mind to find its dignifying and ennobling connection, where, in my opinion, they less reasoned about, say, a substance or its attributes or any such connection, as they tried to live in it, they tried to experience it. They did not doubt it and allowed the recollection and combination and transcendent and immanent presence of the resolution of their minds and souls to unforcedly dream in, dream back, meditatively resolve to the dimensions which lie at the ground and heart and essence and soul of our nature and of nature. And this kind of engagement, which was the inspired background referred to here and the content, also leaves its traces in the regard that was held, say, by Lao Tzu or Chuang Tzu in Taoism in China, as the Buddhists in India, or Buddha, the common declaim was that they've set up what had been turned over. They've got people to remember the immortal way that had gone before. And that the essence, as they say in many portions of the Upanishads, of what is the essential realization and truth in the Vedas is of this timeless nature and strain that is essential to our life. So in service of that, rather than treating it as some kind of estranged condition, we shall treat it with, I hope, a little more thorough involvement. And I think it's very useful that you can read these things yourself. They're all freely accessible in this day and age. But a lot of these traditions were also based on not only individual contemplation and recitation, but of the involved oral tradition that really, I think, has been lost to too great a degree. And so if we can bring that back by sharing these things, I think that can be of use and ascesis, as Aurobindo would like to translate, self-healing to the purpose of life and essence and wisdom and truth. So Heraclitus they assign to about 500 BC. And here are selections from what I thought to be some of the more pertinent and profound of the fragments that have come down to us. Through Sextus Empiricus, we get the following. Though this word is true evermore, yet men are as unable to understand it when they hear it for the first time as before they have heard it at all. For though things come to pass in accordance with this word, men seem as if they had no experience of them when they take trial of words and deeds, such as I set forth, dividing each thing according to its kind, and showing how it truly is. But other men know not what they are doing when awake, even as though they forget what they do in sleep. Fragment 2. And though reason is common, most people live as though they had an understanding peculiar to themselves. So especially in the condition of many of these shared intuitions, there is no space between them. The same idea of the ever-speaking articulation that lies at the process and being and soul of things that delivers its meaning. The word is the expression in our incarnated, manifested basis of the dimension of its uncaused divine reality. So this ruling word, this ever-ruling articulation of presence, is true evermore, and we are growing more and more to realize it and to appreciate it. And that dividing a particular view apart from the inhering universal organic recollection and resolution and communication narrows off in contradistinction to the reality of life and essence and truth. And many of these will also treat of things that he thought were against the principle of such a nature. So next. They vainly purify themselves by defiling themselves with blood, just as if one who had stepped into the mud were to wash his feet in mud. And any man who marked him doing thus would deem him mad. And they pray to these images, as if one were to talk with a man's house, knowing not what gods or heroes are. So obviously the idea of blood sacrifice and of regarding things other than the spiritual basis of this here come into their prominence and place. Thou shouldst unite things whole and not whole, that which tends to unite and that which tends to separate, the harmonious and the discordant. From all things arises the one, and from the one all things. And then in my opinion, emphasize that accidental interactions come against the ruling principle of soul, and we could say consciousness. Every beast is tended by blows. That is, all the intruding impetus is only of a lesser measure of guidance. How can one hide from that which never sets? So, unlike the sun which rises and falls, the eternal principle of the uncaused cause, of the seat and source and presence of all, never departs. For the very best choose one thing before all others, immortal glory among mortals, while the masses eat their fill like cattle. So being led by attachment to the senses rather than by the ruling divine principle and reality within. And also you can tell the different character of these situations, for as you can see, if you read the accounts that come down to us of Pythagoras' life, for instance, many of these traditions which were redolent with poetic imagery and association and union to a situation that had been formed by lots of accidental interaction, lots of strife and raiding. For instance, in the Odyssey we find that, and as we also hear from Thucydides at the beginning of his history, that the idea of being a pirate, of being a raider, had come into such respectability that people did not think twice about it, as is seen in absolutely no thought or account being given of Odysseus's engaging in such practices. So these are often more Laconian, more concise and pointed, rather than deeply poetical and philosophical, but they try to be nuggets of truth, and that's perhaps where these things, as we'll see in many other instances, most developed. This order, the same for all things, no one of gods or men has made, but it always was, and is, and ever shall be, an ever-living fire, kindling according to fixed measure, and extinguished according to fixed measure. So the fabric is being engulfed and unified and integrated and delivered in the divine, efficient, stable source that converts to itself and is the essence of illumination, that pointed foci of image that's brought together in fire, as we will find in the Vedas was most essential. Here certainly leaves a predominant measure and trace. And you can also see the similar imagery of process and water, manifestation and earth, fire as being the internal converting principle, which they're using for these varieties of contemplation, consideration, and meditation. The transformations of fire are, first of all, sea, water, and of the sea one half is earth, and the other half is lightning flash. The earth is poured out as sea and measures the same amount as existed before it became earth. So here the union of cause and measure and illumination is given a certain consideration. Wisdom is one thing. To understand the intelligence by which all things are steered through all things. It is willing and it is unwilling to be called by the name of Zeus. It is law to obey the counsel of one, the one ruling principle and essence, the divine mind in all things, which is identified with the idea of Zeus and lightnings guiding fire and power. Lightning, because lightning is like a branched fire. Those who hear without the power to understand are like deaf men. The proverb holds true of them. Present, they are absent. So here, that which brings to life and realization is the essence and germ of understanding, which gives the competency of presence, the full informed measure of its own reality. Homer should be turned out of the lists and whipped, Heraclitus likewise. Wantonness needs putting out, even more than a house on fire. And those two sections, coming from the same source, I think could probably be drawn to a similar observation, namely, that as a certain irresponsible good living finds its representation allied to the divine in Homer, it is for virtue's sake that he would no doubt be saying this. The people must fight for its law as for its walls. So the guiding principle of union with that one sets the bounds, sets the protection of the essence and guiding understanding and principle of things. The limits of the soul you could not discover, though traversing every path. He was wont to say that vision, false opinion, is a sacred disease, and that vision is deceitful. So a disease of divine measures is false conception, and that the senses, the external witness, is deceitful. Let us not make rash conjectures about the greatest things. The name of the bow is life, but its work is death. To me, one man is 10,000, if he be the best. And then I did not include too many of these, because these are the only bits that is passed down by that false tradition of association, which speaks for it rather than allowing the depth and dignity and subtlety of its nature to speak for itself. In the same river we step and we do not step. We are and we are not. It is wise to hearken, not to me, but to my word, and to confess that all things are one. So I think even in these images, beyond perhaps even the thought of their conception, the idea of the essential oneness also comes to the continent uncaused cause that can speak everything, be everywhere, articulate to its own reality and measure, and be the communication, residence, and trust that does not live the living, essential, unmitigated communion that comes to the cause and commitment and communion of truth that undergirds all. And to underlie that point, the next segment, the hidden attunement is better than the open. Hesiod is the teacher of most men. They suppose that his knowledge was very extensive, when in fact he did not know night and day, for they are one. The way up and the way down is one and the same. Mortals are immortals, and immortals are mortals, the one living the other's death, and dying the other's life. So here the direct interplay of communion between the unborn and the born. And then allied to the conception of Zeus, of the divine mind, that is at the essence and truth and guide of all things. It is the thunderbolt that steers the course of all things, unifying like that measure in the conception of fire. Fire coming upon all things will test them and lay hold of them. It is not meet to act and speak like men asleep. The sleeping are workmen and fellow workers and what happens in the world. So here there's also, you could say, an association between being primarily engaged in activity, being contrary to the principle and soul of consciousness. The way of man has no wisdom, but that of God has. They that are awake have one world in common, but of the sleeping each turns aside into a world of his own. Same principles we started with. There is a sameness, uniformity, a universality at the essence and soul, condition and truth of all things, and turning into what in our day and age we would call specialization, narrow possession, narrow identification, cuts the waves from the ocean's water, fails to see the cause and truth of residence into the heart and life of all. All things are exchanged for fire, and fire for all things, as wares are exchanged for gold, and gold for wares. So coming true into that principle of that primal cause, the same meditation, as we'll see, illumined in different angles, in different thought poems of meditation elsewhere. You cannot step twice into the same rivers, for fresh waters are ever flowing in upon you. It is impossible to touch the same moral substance twice, but through the rapidity of change, it scatters and it gathers, it advances and it retires. But it is important to see that these observations on the flux are to identify that by immediate relation, you do not come to the truth of things, and that by identification and coming to the Word, the divine mind, the guiding lightning, and the integration of that supreme and supernal presence of what he called fire, you come to the moral and guiding intellectual and spiritual truth of yourself. And the Sibyl, with raving lips uttering things mirthless, unbedizened, and unperfumed, reaches over 1,000 years with her voice, thanks to the God in her. so that the principle of the divine, beyond the difficulty of expression, communicates itself. The Lord, whose is the oracle at Delphi, neither utters nor hides his meaning, but shows it by a sign. So in the same way as the full conception has to turn over the expression from all sides, so the unbroken germs of the meditation of life take the full sign unto themselves, which we could say is also a shared vocabulary and intuition that lays between all these different traditions, as we can see and explore. Understanding is common to all. Those who speak with understanding must hold fast to what is common to all, as a city holds fast to its law, and even more strongly. For all human laws are fed by the one divine law. It prevails as much as it will, and it suffices for all things with something to spare. So here there is what in a different tradition would be called the self-luminous nature, that it is unmitigatedly present and complete in itself unto the state of all, and exceeds all other measures, and that only through that reality do all secondary conditions of its own source spring. The soul has its own law, logos, which is a word that you can translate in many ways, which increases itself, grows according to its own needs. The word logos, of course, they sometimes translate as reason, sometimes translate as word, here translates as law. And that's poetically important. The soul has its own articulation, its own law, its own reason, which increases itself organically and fulfills its own needs. They, the Hellenes, pray to statues of the gods that do not hear them, as if they heard and do not give, just as they cannot ask. Pythagoras, the son of Menasarchus, practiced research most of all men, and making extracts from these treatises, he compiled a wisdom of his own, an accumulation of learning, a harmful craft. So it's obvious there what in Pythagoras is being considered as what came to error. And so that we don't get too one-sided and have another lens with which to appreciate this sublime, enriching, and universal content, we can turn to Parmenides. So these are excerpts from a very large poem, which they've given the title of On Nature. The steeds that bare me carried me as far as ever my heart desired, since they brought me and set me on the renowned way. The goddess, who with her own hands conducts the man who knows through all things. On what way was I borne along? For on it did the wise steeds carry me, drawing my car, and maidens showed the way, and the axle glowing in the socket, for it was urged round by the whirling wheels at each end, gave forth a sound as of a pipe, when the daughters of the sun, hasting to convey me into the light, threw back their veils from off their faces and left the abode of night. There are the gates of the ways of night and day, fitted above with a lintel and below with the threshold of stone. They themselves high in the air are closed by mighty doors, and avenging justice keeps the keys that open them. Her did the maidens entreat with gentle words, and skilfully persuade to unfasten without demur the bolted bars from the gates. Then, when the doors were thrown back, they disclosed a wide opening. When their brazen hinges swung backwards and the sockets fastened with rivulets and nails, straight through them on the broad way did the maidens guide the horses and the car, and the goddess greeted me kindly, and took my right hand in hers, and spake to me these words: Welcome, noble youth, that comest to my abode on the car that bears thee, tended by a mortal charioteer. It is no ill chance, but justice and right, that have sent thee forth to travel on this way. Far indeed does it lie from the beaten track of men. Meet it is that thou shouldst learn all things, as well the unshaken heart of persuasive truth, as the opinions of mortals, in which there is no true belief at all. Yet none the less shalt thou learn of these things also, since thou must judge approvedly of things that seem to men, as thou goest through all things in thy journey. Excerpt 2. Come now, I will tell thee, and do thou hearken to my saying and carry it away. The only two ways of search that can be thought of. The first, namely, that it is, and that it is impossible for anything not to be, is the way of conviction, for truth is its companion. The other is, namely, that it is not, and that something must needs not be. That, I tell thee, is a wholly untrustworthy path, for you cannot know what is not, that is impossible, nor utter it. Segment 3. For it is the same thing that can be thought, and that can be. Section 6. It needs must be that what can be thought and spoken of is, for it is possible for it to be, and it is not possible for what is nothing to be. This is what I bid thee ponder. I hold thee back from the first way of inquiry, and from this other also, upon which mortals, knowing not, wander in two minds. For hesitation guides the wandering thought in their breasts, so that they are borne along stupefied, like men deaf and blind. Undiscerning crowds, in whose eyes the same thing and not the same is and is not, and all things travel in opposite directions. 7. For this shall never be proved, that the things that are not are, and do thou restrain thy thoughts from this way of inquiry, nor let habit force thee to cast a wandering eye upon this devious track, or to turn thither by thy resounding ear, or thy tongue, but do thou judge the subtle refutation of their discourse uttered by me. 8. One path only is left for us to speak of, namely that it is, and in it very many tokens that what is uncreated and indestructible, alone, complete, immovable, and without end. Nor was it ever, nor will it be, for now it is, all at once, a continuous one. For what kind of origin for it will you look for? In what way and from what source could it have drawn its increase? I shall not let thee say nor think that it came from what is not, for it can neither be thought nor uttered that what is not, that what is not is. And if it came from nothing, what need could have made it arise later rather than sooner? Therefore it must either be altogether, or be not at all. Nor will the force of truth suffer aught to arise besides itself from that which in any way is. Wherefore justice does not loose her fetters, and let anything come into being or pass away, but holds it fast. And we could continue with that at more length. But I think the universal contents of the inspiration are very enabling. For the steeds, the exact same images as you'll find in different portions of the Vedas or others. Is free vehicle that bears you in the nature of its own reality. The steeds that bear me carried me as far as ever my heart desired. So the heart's utmost desire in nature is fulfilled, since they brought me and set me upon the renowned way, the way, that which comes from the uncontradicted condition and presence of what in a different thought would be the non-dual ground of nature, of the goddess of Brahman, which in another face is the Lord of Love. On what way I was borne along, for on it did the wise steeds carry me, drawing my car and maidens showed the way. And the axle glowing in the socket, so the resonation, the harmony of the rotation upon which this interaction, we could say in communion, of delivering relation was bound, for it was urged round by the whirling wheels at each end, gave forth a sound as of a pipe, when the daughters of the sun, hastening to convey me into the light, threw back their veils, so the sun is their parent, and from off their faces and left the abode of night. And there the gates of the ways of night and day, fitted above with a lintel and below with a threshold of stone. So illumination and darkness here find their gate. They among themselves high in the air are closed by mighty doors, and avenging justice. So there's a moral and integral connection here. Keeps the keys that open them. How did the maidens entreat with gentle words and skilfully persuade to unfasten without demur the bolted bars from the gates. And then the visionary experience of this Lord of Love, of the goddess who lies at the heart of things, face and a being and a soul of Brahman, we could say, of the divine mind of what goes by the name of Zeus, says that there either has to be a continence, an internal reality at the soul of all presence and cause, that nothing else is consistent with itself or is of life and truth and purpose to our station. But all these meditations come in exactly the same terms and forms as we'll find in the Vedas.